Hey folks, welcome everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. Thank you for being here in our second to last pre-conference webinar. We have one more next week, but this is one of the most interesting ones, I would say. Big year for privacy topics in Europe and the whole world. So before jumping into the presentation, let me give you some context of why we're doing this. So in less than 2 weeks, we're having a conference in Valencia, in Spain. The Selenium and the Appium conference are happening together for, I think, the second time or the first one. First time, I don't remember exactly, but it will be here from the 26th to the 28th of March in Valencia, in Spain. And that conference is going to have a great agenda. It's going to have a bunch of topics that are super interesting, very wide set of topics. And one of the things that we're doing in this edition is that we're not covering only the typical testing set of topics, but we're also covering other things like video game automation. We're jumping into accessibility as well, which is very important. That automation helps a lot, that type of assertions. And there are other set of usages for WebDriver based scripts that are very useful for monitoring and observability. So those topics are brand new in the conference. And obviously, AI is a big component of this conference. We have several talks that are covering that specific topic, and I think they are very exciting as well. So how you can use Selenium with AI, Appium as well, how you can create plugins to make your automation life much easier. Um, but yeah, we have this really good set of talks and topics, basically because we have a great group of people. The organizers and the program review committee have worked endlessly to have a really good set of talks. So thanks to them, we have that for all of us. And if you want to see the agenda, it's already live for already a couple of months. If you go to seleniumconf/agenda, you will be able to browse all the different talks we have. We have Angie Jones again, one of the biggest personalities in the testing industry for years. We have people from the local industry in Spain, Almudena Vivanco, who's going to tell us a bunch of things about performance testing. We have different people who have been contributing to the project and to the industry for quite a while. So have a look at the agenda because we still have some tickets available. We're not going to jump to the last call yet, only like the 3-4 days before the conference, but you can still get your tickets at the regular price. And if you're watching this webinar, then you are in for a treat because you can use the pre-conf webinar discount code and you can get 10% off your ticket. Without talking more about the conference that I hope you attend either in person or maybe watching the videos afterwards that we publish, today, going back to the topic of privacy, we're going to talk about how privacy is being understood by Deepti, and we also have Ethan on the background. So let's welcome them to the stage. Hey Ethan, hey Deepti, thank you for being here. First of all, before everything, I just want to give you a huge thank you from the Selenium and Appium community because you're basically donating your time right now to share your knowledge, your expertise, everything you understand about this important topic for this 2025. So yeah, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Diego.
Everybody.
Yeah, I don't want to extend the intro for much longer. I think you can both also do your own intro during the presentation. So I just want to probably add your presentation right now.
Okay.
I have to, obviously I have to take off mine first. This is all like a bit relaxed, so don't worry about it. One last thing for our viewers. We have a good number of viewers. So this is an interesting topic for everyone. I will leave some messages on the chat, but if you have any questions or any comments, please drop them as a comment, either if you are in YouTube or in LinkedIn Live, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. So feel free to add them there, and we're gonna cover them at the end of the presentation. So again, Deepti and Ethan, thank you for being here. The stage is yours. And again, huge thank you from the community.
Thank you, Diago, and thanks for having us here. It's a fun topic. Well, starting with interests, I guess I will start off and pass it to Ethan. My name is Deepti. For the past 13 plus years, I've been deeply invested in quality engineering, not in just how we build and test, but in how quality drives business growth. My focus areas include product quality that fuels market adoption and data insights quality that powers business decisions. You may be wondering how I got into this field. So, my curiosity for breaking things was quite natural. It started in childhood. And so my parents said, you'd make a better engineer. So I pursued engineering, first building computer chips in college in India, and later implementing lean engineering at Eden Aerospace while pursuing masters at the Cal State. It's what truly was fascinating for me was the consumer facing applications and really finding and reporting bugs even when I was in India when the bandwidth wasn't that great, right? So professionally I have shaped quality strategies at scale across various industries. My journey started at dealertrack DMS, now part of Cox Automotive, where I led enterprise software quality, evolving the dealer management solutions for the automotive industry across 50 different states within US, maintaining those tax law compliance testings year over year, right? My next stop was at Comscore. As a head of QA, I led transformational changes across syndicated full stack through innovation, cultural shifts, and introducing test automation. I led quality efforts across data sets spanning 210 media US markets. And these data sets had granularity of 30-second data to complex aggregates that were powering insights for both buy and the sell side of the market. Now I am at Paramount, a global entertainment powerhouse, home to iconic brands like CBS, MTV, Nickelodeon, and Comedy Central, just to name a few. I am the director of quality engineering, and I lead the analytics space today. A little about Paramount. Paramount Plus is ranked number 4 globally in S1 services. Today, we have 78 million subscribers that are using the service. My role includes leading manual, automation, and data pipeline test disciplines across various product lines like Paramount Plus, Pluto TV, CBS Sports, and more. One of my favorite projects has been the Delta integration, enabling streaming for Paramount Plus in the skies 34,000 feet high across 750 US aircrafts, bringing entertainment to thousands of travelers daily. So you can probably by now tell that my core mission is really leveraging quality as a business growth enabler and driving innovation and operational efficiencies. With that, I'd love to pass it to Ethan.
Hi, folks. Ethan Gray, Vice President of Product Management here at Paramount Plus. I oversee aspects of identity and access management, privacy, security, fraud mitigation, payments, and partner integrations, of which Deepti and I worked on Delta together. So couldn't have done Delta literally without Deepti and her team being with me there in Atlanta in a secure facility, testing that solution. My journey with product has been 20 years. I've been doing my role in various media organizations for about 2 decades. But software has always been a part of my life. So as I told Deepti and we've talked about in detail, I had 2 very disabled siblings. And part of my job, what I felt when I was a kid, was actually to make software to help them communicate. So I started off on Apple Basic, for those of you that are my age or older, creating software that would allow them to be able to communicate with the world. I then went to business school at Stern, NYU Stern, and I promptly came out and became an engineer. While Deepti's parents were happy that she became an engineer, my parents were not. But what I did is I took that business knowledge and that business know-how with me to being an engineer on the ground for lots of big projects that probably many of you have used over your life. For the past 15 years or so, I've really been a part of AVOD, which is advertising video on demand, and then also SVOD, which is subscription video on demand. I've done that at Disney, where I helped to launch Disney Plus. I did that at Warner Brothers, where I helped to launch Max. And I do that here, where I was part of the Paramount Plus launch team as well. So happy to answer any questions that you have, and looking forward to the conversation, Deepti.
Oh, love it, Ethan. This is going to be exciting and fabulous. Well, before we jump into the presentation, I like to set some expectations for how this next 45 minutes is going to go for us. As we start the presentation, I would ask that y'all post your questions in the chat. We will get to the questions towards the end of the presentation so that we're able to finish our flow, as well as give you all of the information that we've prepped for. And the second expectation would be, this is primarily about testing and testing only. This is not about interpreting any loss. And this is all about, how do you test? How do you think about it? And who are your key players? How do you work with them? So I'm excited to give you this, tons of information around it as well. And lastly, I ask that y'all stay interactive with us. We want to know when something resonates with you. So if you want to use an emoji to give a thumbs up, and we'll have some interactive poll questions here as well as we jump in. So I definitely ask you get your mobile phones ready. So there'll be a nice QR code that we're going to ask you to scan so that you can take the poll live, and we'll see the results as they come up. All right. Are you ready to get started, Ethan?
I am.
All right, let's jump in. So today we're going to be talking about privacy who's who, learning for the next generation quality testing. And like I mentioned, we're going to cover tons of great topics: data privacy and security testing, privacy testing strategies. We're going to also touch on security testing strategies and wrap it up with key learnings and best practices. But first, let's do that interactive poll that I was talking about. So before we get started on our first segment, I'm going to quickly pull a timer out. Oops. I'll give you all 45 seconds to take the poll, and I'll be able to see all of the results along with you here on the screen. All right, Ethan, we got one response.
It was only good. It was only good.
Only good. That's right. Well, I was thinking about like questions like this. What was your experience with privacy? And I'm often intrigued by the amount of information that either you get or people reflect on. Imagine me asking this question with, give me your first name, give me your last name, give me your address, the age, gender. Would you take it, Ethan?
Well, I would, because it's my job to collect that information so that you can watch great content on Paramount Plus. But in my personal life, again, as I said, growing up the way that I did, privacy and security have been a huge part of just my conscious everyday personal life. So it's a huge consideration. And I'm interested to talk to about what that means from a global perspective as well, because what we see here in the United States as sort of being private information or secure is very different around the world.
Agreed. 100% agree. I also see that maybe the survey is asking for people to sign up for the service. So we just had fewer replies. I would recommend, if you are going through this journey with us today, do sign up for this particular polling solution so that you can take more polls as we go through our journey. So coming back to what Ethan was talking about, I often think about who's who moment and how is equality a shared responsibility, right? Privacy testing isn't just a job for one team. It's a shared responsibility across multiple roles. And if we don't align on who does what, things can slip through the cracks. Whether you're in privacy and governance, security, data engineering, product, QA, or development, each role has a stake in privacy, compliance, and data protection. But here's the catch: knowing your role isn't enough. Teams have to collaborate and align goals across the entire product lifecycle to make privacy testing effective and to enable that business growth. Otherwise, gaps form and those gaps lead to risks. So, a quick tip: when in doubt, ask questions. That's right, ask questions. If something seems unclear in your test strategy, don't assume. It's better to get cross team alignment early than to deal with bugs and compliance issues later, right? So, even from a product perspective, what's one key challenge you see when it comes to getting teams aligned on that privacy first design?
So it's a great question. I've thought a lot about it. So if we even step back from the team itself, privacy means something very different to the governments, to the companies that are collecting information, to the partners that are partnering with you, be it as a vendor or being as a partner that you may have monetary transactions with, right? The end user's perspective of privacy. And then, as you said, all these different teams, what they consider to be privacy. So it's a really kind of understanding what's the holistic view of what do we mean when we're talking about privacy. Privacy also has many different flavors, right? So like something like HIPAA, which is, in the United States, it's a healthcare law that means that, certain information is proprietary, is private, and cannot be accessed. Those laws are really elastic around the world, right? Some countries it's much more lax, some countries it's much more strict. So I think what I would say of that is really kind of understanding what we mean by privacy, right? Going into a particular project. And then I think that permeates down to the team. And I think product's responsibility and really the organization that you work for is to help you understand what they mean by privacy. Hopefully that makes sense.
Well said, Ethan. I was looking at some of the research polls year over year around privacy testing and security testing. There was a very interesting poll that said that 75% of the user base will not sign up for brands if they do not showcase that trust that you will protect the data, right, for what is being given to you. It's a great segue also to understanding that data and privacy testing. Now, the other day, Ethan, I was telling my son that I was preparing for this webinar, and he has a curious mind for being 8-year-old, right? He was like, what is privacy and testing? And it is like, is it like when I say, give me privacy in the bathroom when someone knocks? And honestly, that's such a great way to think about it, right? When we talk about privacy testing, it's really about the who and the why. How do you test who gets access to this information and why they need it? Do the right people have access for the right reasons? And for how long? Security testing, on the other hand, is about validating how we protect that information. Is it through encryption, anonymization, and protection from unauthorized access, like expected, right? So that analogy really stuck with me, Ethan. So, from a product's perspective, how do you see privacy and security playing different but complementary roles?
Yeah. So an organization's view on privacy, I think, really manifests in the product, right? So again, if you think about a healthcare website, right, that privacy standpoint and thus the security, right, really is apparent, right, when you're using their software, where you're using, their forms, whatever it might be. So the organization really reflects its views in the interface, right, that a customer sees when they're interacting with it, whether it's an end customer, literally a consumer, or whether it's someone on the back end. Privacy and security can sometimes be at odds, right? Because privacy sometimes means that certain information just can't be collected, or certain information just can't be accessed for certain purposes. So that is definitely weighs heavily on what does it mean to then have that information be secure, right? So it's really kind of a hand in hand kind of thing. I look at, right? And so if you say, well, what is private information? The security's responsibility is to keep that information secure, right? That kind of seems like self-evident, but sometimes that's not really kind of like how it works. What I would say in summary is that it's really, really, really important to, at the beginning of whatever your project is or product is to really say, what is privacy to us? And then in that, what's the level of security that we need to be able to build in to keep that information safe? And where is it? Is it on the front end? Is it in the middleware? Or is it back end? Or is it all of it?
Wow, that was amazing insight. And I often think about product and quality as the best of both worlds, because you do want both of them to be extremely aligned in order to make sure that market adoption for the product is, fueling that growth, right? So, talking about privacy and various flavors behind it, I do want to take a perspective of local versus global. So when we think about privacy testing, one of the biggest challenges is that it's not universal. What's valid in one country can be a violation in another. That's why privacy testing needs to be context aware, especially for global brands operating across multiple regions, across multiple various laws, right? You have GDPR, you have CCPA, you have HIPAA, like you mentioned. So let me just take a real world example here. Um, I think of Visa and Levi's, which is a financial brand. Visa and Levi's is a fashion brand, both globally recognized. But the way they handle privacy varies significantly by region. So when I was in India, taking Visa for an instance, since it operated in that financial transactions side of the world, the compliance was super critical, right? But in India, when we think about laws, there may be more that go on top of that benchmark laws like GDPR, CCPA. You may have things like RBI compliance rules that govern how long the transaction data is stored and who has access to it. This means that a single strategy definitely will not work globally. So there's a need for that localized testing that you were talking about, right? Be it with the automation tools that you use to test, the consent-driven testing, but also the network testing. Like you have lagging, you have to connect into multiple VPNs and such to perform that localized testing, right? But also the payment and subscriptions that we touched on, and how that payment information is handled across borders. So let's shift to maybe a completely different industry from Visa. I mentioned Levi as a globally available brand, but user language preferences impact how privacy settings are displayed. For example, like you were talking about, Ethan, in maybe EU, the consent pop-ups must be explicit and detailed under the GDPR law, which means every cookie must have a clear opt-in, right? It is different in US for us, but also it is the familiar kind, as in we do comply to GDPR as well. So how do we test so many various flavors of it, where testing globally isn't just about compliance, but also it's about ensuring that the user experience feels natural, trustworthy in every market that the brand enters, right? So, Ethan, from a product perspective, how do teams ensure that they're designing that privacy first experiences that feel intuitive across various regions?
Yeah, that's a great question. So Again, privacy rules and regulations can sometimes be very, very daunting, right? So again, take something like the EU or even within the EU GSA, right? So the privacy regulations there and the mandates that you have to explain privacy, right, to be very declarative are very, very high. What I see sometimes is that the market and the business within the markets assume that the users understand that. They go, well, they understand that we have to be, really in their face about privacy. We have to understand that we're going to have a CMP. We understand that we're going to have a banner on the screen. And so they just take it for granted that the customer is going to jump through those hoops, right? I don't agree with that. I think a company that's, especially a company that's directly selling to an end user, really has to be able to say, listen, we have to be able to comply. We have to be able to make sure that the customer understands that their information is safe and secure, but it doesn't have to be daunting for them. So I think the challenge really is to say is what is the correct level, not the minimum level, right? But what is the correct level of information that you want to be able to display to the customer? And really to go out of your way, in my view, to be able to make that as smooth as possible. And again, not every organization does that because the easiest thing to do is just to say, throw up a banner, have a bunch of check boxes, and the customer will figure it out because they go to 50 websites a day that all do the same thing. Doesn't mean that you have to be the 51st website that puts that burden on the customer.
So well said. You know, it goes back to that who's who moment for me when I think about testing locally versus globally too. There's so much alignment that you need across your holistic team with your cross-functional partners to understand various test scenarios, but also where do you focus and what would get you that most bang for your buck, right? As in, how can you build high quality product through your test strategies where the product flourishes as well? So there was a funny experience that comes to mind when I came to US to pursue my master's. I was filling out some forms, and guess what? On the date, I actually used the European format. And so I had to switch it out at a later point, but the process to switch it out was so tedious, right? This was way back in the day. But it always reminds me of how when we come to testing, it's not always that one size fits all. So make sure that as we think about testing locally and globally, we're validating privacy settings in both local and global environments so that you are also ensuring that your quality strategy involves like locales, languages, and also some of the other factors that could flow into there. It reminds me of this analogy of like, give the key to your friend for the house, but not to the safe sort of moment. What do you think about that comment?
I was laughing because I thought it was funny. I never actually thought about that. How much secure information is inside the house that you're actually letting your friend come in and take care of your cat or water your plants. But I think that's a very apt analogy.
Nice. Well, with that, let's talk about product quality because it is definitely something that keeps revolving a lot in my head. So when I think about product quality, I often ask myself the question of how does holistic product quality really impact both business outcomes and user experiences? While we run tests in these various categories that are on the screen, functional quality, security and privacy quality, but also user experience quality, this isn't just a technical effort, right? It's always about balancing that privacy, security, and the usability aspect of it. Just to touch on the functional piece of it, functional quality is really to make sure that the product works as expected with no major defects. Now, I said no major defects. It's software, y'all. So it's always going to be buggy, but you have to be able to understand if a particular defect, what the impact of that defect would be on the business itself, on the user experience itself, right? Ethan, I really liked our conversation when we were talking through the slide where you said with user experiences, you want to be able to build it in a way where you focus on the middle. Can you explain a little bit more for our
Yeah,
audience around?
absolutely. There is a famous or fairly famous, well-known product designer and product usability expert, Dan Formosa. And he worked at OXO, Good Grips, can openers, scissors, things where you have a lot of manual usability. So it's very much kind of a tool person. And he thinks a lot about how products are used. And he has this great quote. I'm going to paraphrase it. He said, "Design for the extremes, and the middle will take care of itself." That really means that if you create a pair of scissors that a toddler can use, maybe they shouldn't be using scissors, but a toddler can use and their grandparent can use, then everybody from age 4 to 90 will be able to use that same pair of scissors. The way that I look at it is that software is a little different. Unless you are doing like I was doing when I was a kid, which is designing for the extremes, right? Designing for a person who has learning disabilities, or designing for a person who has low vision, or designing for a person who is nonverbal, right? Those are the extremes. But most of your software is going to be in the middle. And I think, Deepti, what you and I were talking about is I say design for the greatest good, right? For where most of your customers are going to be. They're going to be in the 1% to 99%. They're not going to be the extremes. Privacy and security, I find, especially in some markets, tend to be extreme, right? They're saying, well, what if one person does this one thing? Or what if one person has a bad experience? As Deepti said, that's inevitable, right? And you've designed systems to try to compensate for that as much as possible. What I would say is see the forest through the trees. Most of your customers are going to need to have the best possible experience that's kind of averaged out, right? So what I would say in summary is most of us have already designed for the extremes, right? Continuously focusing on those extremes takes it away from everybody else who's going to be using your software or your services. Hopefully that makes sense.
I love what you said. Don't do exhaustive testing is what I'm hearing in my head as a quality expert, right? Maybe the idea here is to do more exploratory time box testing for those extreme pieces of it while your major focus is retained in the middle. A great
Exactly.
way to think about it.
Yeah.
Now, Ethan, you mentioned something where how do you like make sure to handle that one outlier that could cause trouble? And what are some of your thoughts around it?
Test-driven development. Some of my favorite people in the entire world are SDETs. And my philosophy is when the test turns green, the code is clean, right? So again, that designing for the extremes, the real world may never get there. You may never get a catastrophic database failure, right? You may not get a timeout on a critical health form, right? But you can definitely mock that in services. Build that into your test. And at every single time you do a build, every single time you do a commit, run that test as if that database is going to fail and compensate for it, but don't spend all of your time doing that because the chances of that happening are rare. They're catastrophic, but they're rare. So again, test-driven development is going to be your absolutely best friend, and make friends with an SDET. They might save your life someday.
Wow, that was powerful. So, my follow up question here is how do you balance these three bubbles that we're seeing on the screen between privacy, security, and usability from a product standpoint? Like, how do you make sure that, as you're thinking through those extremes, but also the middle, in making sure that there's not a negative impact on the usability aspect of it as you're designing that privacy first?
Yeah. To me, again, it's what is your goal as a business and what is your goal in designing that product? If your goal in designing that product is purely security, then that usability, right, and the interaction with that piece of software is going to be very, very different. Maybe it's just a command line, right? But if you're actually selling goods and services, or if you're like Paramount, where you're trying to watch some video, right, that middle is going to be the customer wants to be able to pay you safely, securely, and they want to be able to watch content. That's it. Your job is that, right? And then everything else in the ecosystem around that is in service of that. Yes, you should absolutely be considerate of privacy and security. That's why we're all here, to learn about it, but really understand the intent of the product that you're building. If it's for an end consumer, it should be simple to use. It should be clear, in my view, uncluttered, safe, secure. And then once those safety and security hurdles, right, or protections have been met, right, credit card is safe and secure, payment is safe and secure, information is collected, you've given your privacy, you've given your opt-ins, all that kind of stuff. At that point, get out of the customer's way, right? Let them be able to do the thing that they came to you to be able to do. Sometimes I think companies tend to focus again on everything has to be about the transaction, and then the content or whatever it is sometimes is secondary. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, all of these various topics and insights that we're touching on, it reminds me of the power of data-driven decisions, of how do you figure out what is our middle and how do you figure out those outliers? Can you touch a little bit around how that has helped you through your experience?
It's one of my favorite things to do is to dig into data. Most people would never say that, but probably everybody on this conference right now, that's one of their favorite things to do. So there's qualitative and quantitative kind of investigation that needs to be done every single time, in my view, every single time that you make a product. Again, whether it's command line or whether it's, usability software. And taking a look at historical evidence, right? What have customers done in the past? Success rates, usage, quantities, money, right? Number of transactions, whatever it is, and be able to look then for those patterns, right? Is usage algorithmic? Is usage logarithmic, right? Where is that usage, taking place? How is it taking place? And really, what's the success of that? Also, too, one of the things I really look for is the negative, right? So sometimes people are designing a product only for the success, right? They go, hey, where are the trends of the numbers? I think one of the things to really look at in numbers is what didn't work, right? Where did those things actually fail? Did they fail just because they were impractical, because they were a bad idea? Did they fail in execution? That's the kind of the mushy middle of those numbers. You can see the failure, but once you get into the qualitative part of those failures, right? Then you go, maybe there's an opportunity, right? Maybe there's a place where something could be built or launched or done that has not been done successfully before because you found, right, the anomaly there. I think that's the funnest part of my job, is getting a huge spreadsheet of data and then doing pivot tables.
Well, I love it. I think you and I are in the same bucket on that. Well, speaking of the product quality, well, next up is going to be a poll. So I really hope y'all are ready with those cameras and your mobile phones. And this time I'm going to try and get us a whole hour or 1 hour, or 1 minute. Sorry, we don't have an hour. Let me see. To get us started. Oops. I don't know why the countdown. There we go. We'll do 45 minutes, as we lost 15 seconds already, or 45 seconds. All right, our time's through. However, I do see a couple of responses and a few more maybe adding to it. We could definitely come back and take a look at the results. However, I see proxies, Chrome DevTools, Chrome Inspector, great tools. So let's jump into privacy testing strategies itself. Now, we have covered the importance of quality and privacy testing as a shared responsibility. So now I want to take a look at how do we implement this more impactfully and effectively. So privacy testing is beyond checking compliance or testing for it, right? It is about embedding that privacy validation at every level of the application stack. Let's break this down into three layers while sort of get us started here where privacy testing needs to happen. I'm going to start at the application layer. We'll talk a little about the anonymization and masking, what we're going to test. Traditionally, application layers have UI elements, you have consent pop-ups, pop-in forms, opt-in forms, geo-restricted content, maybe cookie tracking mechanisms, things like that. Why does it matter? Users interact with privacy settings at this level. And incorrect implementation could lead to non-compliance or usability issues. The next one, from a layer standpoint, I think about the microservices because UIs and APIs go well together, right? I've used Postman historically and to test anonymization, tokenization of how do you pass something from UI to API for internal testing or in a secure way, encryption, but also role-based access controls at the API level. Why does this matter? So API handles sensitive data and misconfigure like authentications or poor anonymization could expose that threat, right? So the best practices would be when you're thinking about manual testing, perform API calls, inspect the responses to verify sensitive fields or masked or anonymized before being returned. But also if you're taking the automation route, make sure your API scripts using Postman or Rest Assured or Cypress to validate that anonymized data and that it remains consistent across those calls. The last one I want to touch on here is a data warehouse layer. I often think about testing as a full stack, understanding how the interactions go from the UI layer all the way to that data warehouse layer. So here you may be testing or focused on data anonymization, again, masking, completeness checks, trend analysis. Ethan was talking about data analysis just a minute ago, source versus target validations and such. So again, if you're doing manual testing, make sure your queries are built for identifying any of these around hashing, mass data, or synthetic data. If you're doing automation testing, use the SQL test scripts, or even Great Expectations or PyTest for data to validate anonymized techniques before storing or in transit. One of the most critical privacy strategies in data anonymization and masking is really important, right? For me, anonymization is removing and altering any identifiable information that the users cannot be re-identified. So when the testing happens around it, it's more focused to ensure that that's what we're validating. Masking is totally different in the sense, but also complementary in the sense that we're replacing that sensitive data with placeholders to ensure maybe the teams or even like anybody viewing the data, third party, first party, however, don't have all of the raw data. So testing best practices here would be to query your database to verify that consistency of these various things. But also from an automation standpoint, you can automate hashing consistency checks. You can run tests against log outputs and such. So we've gone through these testing principles within our previous slides. So I'm not going to go through this in the interest of time, but I want to tell you a cool story about privacy. Now, you can do all of the right things. However, if you're not meeting that user experience, that's going to be something, right? So I had this experience recently where I was working on a personal project and I ordered a bunch of wood from Lowe's. Initially, my delivery was set for March 3rd, but when it didn't show up, I called and rescheduled it for March 6th to my project site. A few hours later, into the midday on March 4th, I got a text from Lowe's about my delivery. At first, my heart dropped. I needed the wood to make progress over the weekend. Then I was frustrated. I had literally called and changed the date. And then an epiphany hit me, Ethan. I found a bug and I instantly went to, how would I test this? Where would I test this? Would this be a UI testing? Would this be an API testing? How does the system handle the data updates, right, across various stacks? And so that weekend, I spent some time coding in Python. Now, I do want to say that every customer is not going to have that quality mindset, right? They may feel different things. So the idea here is to be able to resonate with that customer experience, as Ethan was talking about. What is that middle? So Ethan, from a product perspective, how do you see user experience issues like these playing into that quality strategy, and what role does you've touched on the role that the data plays in preventing these problems? So
yeah, so you're definitely in my my story there. You are the extremes. You are the one person who's going to invest their weekend doing Python to be able to look for bugs in the Lowe's or Home Depot. So so the way that I look at it too is like, listen, the client, the end client, right, is your weakest link, right? It's the one that is the least secure, right? It's the one that is going to be most prone to issues, right? Like, unless you have, like, a completely SOA or MVC kind of environment. And really what that is honestly, it's testing as if you were an end user, right? Like when you do QA is sort of a big, kind of pool of kind of testing, is really go in there and say, what is the most common thing, right? Like, what is the most common thing that a person's going to do? And then cross-reference that with things like privacy, right? If someone is going to get a text message that has their address in it, right? Okay, how do they feel about that? Is that address up to date? Does that address need to be updated at any particular time, right? Is that information secure, right? Are we sure that that's the user's actual phone, right? And it's not some intermediary middleware that's sort of catching that, right, and then stealing that person's address. All of that is building up, right? But the end user is going to experience, what is the purpose of the product that is serving that user? That's the middle, right? That's everything, right? And then from there, again, as I said, is, how is that information being trafficked? How is that information being stored? Is that information secure, right? Is there a man in the middle, so on and so forth? Hopefully that kind of makes sense.
yeah, totally does. And look at my code. It's beautiful. I even coded it. So I'm not going to go into some of the differences between Android versus Apple in the interest of time. But if y'all would like to learn more around this, please hit me up on my LinkedIn, and we'll make sure that me and Ethan will socialize our LinkedIn profiles as well. Yeah. So we definitely went down a rabbit hole. At least that's how I think about it. And today is a Friday. So I'm going to be jumping back on the rabbit hole show and really absorb all of those great insights. If you haven't watched it, again, today's a Friday. It is streaming on Paramount Plus. All right, folks, one more poll. So get ready, and we'll do a 45-second timer. And let's go. All right, we see more responses popping in now. Somewhat familiar, just a little. The question was, are you familiar with security testing strategies, right? All right, so let's jump into what those look like today for the security testing strategies. It is a critical part of privacy testing, where while privacy focuses on the who and the why, security is all about protecting that data from unauthorized access and misuse. So with that, I also think of, when I think of strategies, I'm going back to that full stack mode. And the key strategies here are penetration testing, right? That can be accomplished at the UI level, maybe API level, identifying vulnerabilities in script, API endpoints through simulated attacks. I think about taxes in this particular instance because those platforms are extremely, extremely sensitive. So penetration testing ensures that the sensitive taxpayer data is not accessible via unauthorized API calls, or even fuzz testing, where you're injecting inputs to test how the systems handle malfunction data. These tests can occur either on a form input, API calls, or even on error handling. When I think about fuzz testing, I think about the healthcare industry a lot more, because this is to make sure, like, every time you go to an appointment, maybe you're doing your consent form, but also to make sure that this fuzz testing prevents crashes and making sure that the medical records are actually, in a secure and a more protected place. Next up is authentication and access testing. When I think about this particular category of testing, this is, to me, ensuring that the event logging or even the access controls are properly secured. So I would test login flows, role-based access, tokenization, or its expiration, right? We see a tons of tokenization driven or even authentication driven testing, say in banking industries or financial industries, right? So that's another way to think about it, is really to make sure that the session tokens are tested to prevent unauthorized access after the timeouts. If you have signed up on any of your applications, you have a two-factor multi-authentication, again, to make sure that you have the right person is accessing the right data. So all of this comes with defect clustering and also risk-based testing, making sure that you're focusing on that middle where the high-risk application components should be the first ones to test, right? And heavily vetted, whereas those extremes, like Ethan was talking about, are things that you can still accomplish through time box exploratory tests. So here, the application layer may focus on things like critical workflows, data handling, and such. The last one I want to touch on is that automated schema validation in the warehouse level and data integrity checks. Here, you're ensuring that there's data completeness, secure transmission between UI and the backend. So you could be testing through SQL queries, you could be testing through APIs. We see maybe some of these more prominently in certain industries versus the other industries as well, right? So with that, you may be wondering, how does Selenium and Appium come into picture here? So there are multiple ways to be able to use those tools. Even though they're traditionally meant for the UI piece of it, you can still accomplish the testing by capturing the API call and making sure your end-to-end customer journey is actually also vetted through these tools. If you need more information on it, don't forget to reach out to me on it on LinkedIn, and we're happy to chat about it as well. And so from a product perspective, Ethan, how do teams balance security best practices while ensuring a seamless user experience?
Yeah. So, like I said before, that the client is kind of your weakest link, right? And so I understand that software at scale is hard, right? But I always try to ensure that we're building in a services-oriented architecture, right? That the client is as thin as possible. That's a really good way to be able to keep the majority of customer information safe and secure, right? Is having the client be pretty much unaware of a lot of stuff. So it's that classic like model view controller, MVC, right? The model controls the data, the view is a container, right? And the controller is the APIs that kind of shuttle information back and forth. So in that, it allows us to be able to then really focus on the security on the back end, right? And then things like ensuring that your APIs are secure. it sounds like we're running out of time. I'll wrap this up. But yeah, the way that I look at this is that making sure that your client is thin, making sure that your APIs are safe and secure, making sure that your model is also safe and secure.
Awesome. Well said, Ethan. And I think that brings me to that captcha moment of the beautiful intersection between privacy, security, and usability. I won't go into this with the interest of time. However, I'm going to leave these on the recording so you can go back and check them out. If you have questions, please feel free to reach out to me and Ethan on our LinkedIn as well. So the last segment, let's do a quick recap. We've learned a lot today between privacy testing strategies and security best practices and the role that the captcha does play in balancing all of this. So if there's one takeaway from the session, it's that quality isn't just about running tests. It's about designing a responsible ecosystem with your partners, right? Quality as a shared responsibility to fuel that next generation of technology. What we've covered today is all around the foundational concepts that are important regardless of how your technology evolves. With that, I'm going to give it back to give a poll actually and give it back to Diago.
Thank you. Just let me, I want to fill out the poll. So I was in the middle of that. Good. I'm just gonna wait a moment until maybe more people post things, and then we can see the survey as well. But before anything else, I just want to thank you again because this was very interesting for me from the point of view that so I have seen two types of presentations when talking about privacy. One is very theoretical, like explaining, like the European law and how this affects people and all that. And the other one goes all the way much to the technical side, which is like how to test different things with different plugins and different things that you can do to check privacy. But I haven't seen one like this one where you have perspectives from product and from the testing area where both of them work together and they figure out how to propose strategies and different uh, aspects to take into account when doing this type of testing. So for me, this was very interesting because I could see how different things play into the whole process, and just for that, I am deeply grateful. So thank you for taking the time to be here. And I see that we have a good amount of people watching the webinar, and they never left. So that also shows a good engagement. Um,
Thank you,
yeah,
Diago.
I think maybe there was this little issue that you have to join the, the the surveys, the service. So I think sometimes people just don't want to do that, but I think that's why we didn't get many replies. But we had like around 30 people total, which is a good number for this time of the day on a Friday. So that's pretty good.
I know, like Ethan, the sun hasn't even risen on his side of the world yet, and here he is. So I do want to take a minute and do a special thank you to you, Ethan, for being here super early your time and sharing all the wonderful insights, and for Diago for hosting us. I appreciate it.
Thank you both for having me.
Thank you. I just have one question from the. This is having now because I haven't seen any questions from the audience yet, and one of the things I'm seeing constantly popping up across the industry is that so we have like performance testing, we have the regular automation, we also have things like nowadays accessibility and so on. So how are you folks balancing? Like there is a new sprint or there is a new time of the month where they're working on new features. How do you folks balance like the effort to let's test privacy on this one. Let's test on or how do you focus on each type of testing as you move forward along your regular activities?
Great question, Diago. I have 3 words for it: data-driven testing. So
Yep.
we look at the data for what the application's being used for, right? And you tailor your test strategies based off of it. Like Ethan was talking about, it's good to know what that middle looks like, but also it's important to understand the holistic picture. So through those data-driven insights, we can say, hey, you know what? The core automation, because it's repetitive in nature, could be focused in the middle, right? Whereas when it comes to performance or even manual testing, you can tailor it based off of, again, scenarios, the industry, and the seasonal aspect of things that come in and out of the business as well. Ethan, you want to add more to it?
Sure. Yeah. So every time that we design a feature, right, we take a look at what information is going to be transacted, right, and what our internal and external systems are going to be. Sometimes some internal systems aren't touched. We know this, right? Sometimes we never make a service call to a partner. But every single time that we do, part of product and my responsibility specifically is to be the connective tissue, right? So there's a client team, there's an API team, but there's also folks like SRE. There's folks like information security, right? So my job is to be able to go say, hey, by the way, we're going to be collecting new PII information, or we're going to have a new transaction type, right? Or we're going to have a new service call to a partner. The client teams are doing what they're doing, right? API teams are doing what they're doing, but upstream, right? Slightly obfuscated from those two teams is there's an entirely different amount of testing that's going on, right? There's pen testing, right? There's security testing. There's updates to the web application firewall. Again, API and client teams are none the wiser about it. But it's really important, again, to understand what is it that you're building and what data is being transacting, and making sure that you have someone, be it me or someone else, who is running the gamut, who is that connective tissue between the entire lineage of where that data is going to be.
The who's who moment.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Awesome.
All right. I think, I mean, we're over time already, but I didn't see, I mean, aside of several comments where people said, like, you made a great point, Ethan, or like, that was interesting, like, most comments were around appreciation to the content and to the insights you were sharing. Uh, I guess this is a super wide topic that having a specific question is tough. I understand the audience because of that. So yeah, I think we're gonna start wrapping this up. So if you two folks could stay for a moment in the background, and then we'll have a chat in a moment. I just want to thank everyone for being here. Ethan, Deepti, thank you for being here. Um, you folks can watch the recording, and if you want to engage with Ethan and Deepti, you have their LinkedIn profiles in the comments, both in YouTube and in LinkedIn as well. But as well, if you check the LinkedIn event, you will see their profiles there, and that you can engage with them more and more. So thank you everyone for being here. I wish you all a great weekend, and looking forward to the next one. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.